Welcome to this edition of Let's Talk. If you've been watching any of the more recent episodes, then you know that we have been moving from a digital-only company to a company that also works with film. If you think about the limitations or the requirements of film, depending on your perspective, once you have developed the film, you have two choices: either process prints the old-fashioned analog way, or move the negatives into a digital environment. If you choose the latter, you have two options: photograph the negatives, which is neither transparent nor without its issues, or use a scanner with scanner software. We've elected to go the scanner route, and we're using an Epson V600, and the software is SilverFast. This is the SE or Basic Edition. Before we start, I want to mention the fact that this is intensely sophisticated software, that the user interface is often inconsistent, and there are aspects of using the software that are likewise inconsistent, for lack of a better phrase. We're going to look at the basics. We're going to talk about the user interface. We'll come back in a subsequent edition and actually do a scan. One of the first points I want to make is that this software can and often does terminate unexpectedly. Despite the fact that my laptop has 32 gigs of RAM and an i7 processor, there are times when, if I have, for example, Affinity Photo open or Adobe's InDesign, SilverFast will simply terminate. Do that enough times and the software will essentially stop working the way it is supposed to. When that occurs, the first thing you want to do is click on Service Dialog, which also allows you to update your license, reset your email, and a number of other things, including check for updates. But the most important thing you want to keep in mind is software reset. That will fix most of your problems. Let's go back to the welcome screen and let's go in. Note, I'm using English. Note, it identifies my scanner. If it can't find your scanner, the software will not load. Okay, you can see that I've done a pre-scan, and I've got 3 images loaded that I'm going to ultimately work on. But before we explore that in the next episode, let's take a look at the user interface. One of the most important icons you're going to need to remember is the workflow pilot. It's a bit kludgy, but it will guide you through the entire process, as you'll see in the next video. One point I do want to make: the software is not able to tell the difference between color film and black and white film. Make absolutely sure at the appropriate time you specify the fact that you're working with color or black and white. More about that in a second. A couple of things very quickly. One of the most important dialogues is this one, for naming and for selecting file format. We strongly suggest you come up with a naming convention. We suggested an earlier one in one of the Let's Talk episodes. I also think it's important that you save as a TIFF. Since a TIFF is not compressed, it is a lossless format as opposed to a JPEG. I would also urge you to make sure that you select typesetter 600 ppi in order to get absolutely every detail out of the film that is possible. This slider is important. We'll talk more about that, but in addition to the 600 ppi, it's set at 6400, which produces a file size of over 220 meg, which is excellent for working. The larger the file, the better the quality of the scan, the more detail that will be available. I'll show you a couple of finished images momentarily. One of the other inconsistencies, by the way, in the interface, usually clicking on a gear will show advanced options. And here you can see that I have made my width and my height almost identical to the film I'm using. I'm using 6x7, that is 6 centimeters by 7 centimeter film from a Pentax 6x7 camera. In terms of inconsistencies, however, in the dialog underneath that, here, advanced settings is the equivalent of a graduation cap. And by the way, in terms of settings, I always change this to 6-bit, 16-bit, and this goes to 4. In terms of a few other basic aspects of the interface before we call it an episode, you can view the histogram. The histogram is automatically set. You can, underneath that, set the gradation, or what we more oftentimes would call curves. And one of the most important dialogues where you can set tolerance and exposure is the film dialog. You want to make absolutely sure you have selected the right film by manufacturer, by type, and by ISO. If you don't, you will very likely not get a very good scan. Walking through a few other tools. That tool expands the selection. I've got gain turned on. Gain allows me to keep an icon of the image I'm working on with a 100% scan here. You may be able to hear the scanner doing its thing in the background. In addition to that, keep in mind that every time you do a pre-scan, the scanner will again deliver information to the software. That allows the software to appropriately calibrate the image. If you want to manually set your black point and your white point, you use the pipette tool. There is, again, a slight inconsistency. For example, let's say I want to adjust my black point. I get one and only one option. I have to go back, click on black point again, and the process continues. The good news is there is a reset button. And by the way, that's true for both setting the neutral point and for setting the white point. Hopefully, in a future edition of the software, they will correct that. Also, a couple of other things I want to draw to your attention. Number one is you want to make sure that you don't use, if you're doing black and white, ISRD or SRD. They essentially allow you to correct in the scanning software defects that are present in the film. The only problem with that is the silver nitrate inside black and white film on the emulsion keeps that from happening effectively. If you attempt to use ISRD, you will end up with an unscannable image, or if you do get a scan, it'll be totally black. Been there, done that. And another inconsistency in the software, and I hope you make a special note of this, once you turn on ISRD, there is no way to turn it off. The only way to turn it off is to run the workflow pilot again. Once again, one of those inconsistencies. In the end, it's still phenomenal software. It will give you great images. A couple of other things to watch out for that we're going to talk about later. Make sure you're set to a negative film, that you have selected black and white. Again, you don't want to process this film as though it were color. In terms of some example scans from this software. Here are a couple from this morning. In fact, here's one from the scene that you saw on my scanner. Very powerful, very detail-oriented. These are very large images. They take a while to sharpen up. Absolutely exquisite detail. When we return, we're going to actually go through the process of scanning an image. I'll walk you through how I set up my scans, and hopefully that will give you information enough to go forward on your own. As always, thanks for listening to Let's Talk. If you want to contact us, we can be reached at NyghtFalcon.com or our magazine site, nightvision.com. And if you want to email me directly, you can reach me at inspiration@NyghtFalcon.com.